Welcome to the Witness Box, everybody. I'm your host, Joshua Diaz, alongside my co-host, Dr. Gary Bricado, a forensic psychologist, author of The New Evil, and Chris McDonough, a seasoned homicide detective. How long is that now, Chris? I always lose track. Tonight, we are going to talk about the Scott Peterson, Laci Peterson case, and something that, you know, I've always kind of followed, and I'll get into that a little bit as we go on, because I remember the day that it happened. I remember the breaking news. It was actually at night, Christmas Eve, I believe, and I was in the town of Modesto when it happened, and it was one of those fleeting moments, and I've always, you know, spoiler alert, I've always believed that Scott was guilty. I've never doubted his guilt one time, and be interesting to hear what you guys have to think, what you guys think about it as well. Chris?
Well, you know, Scott's got a new theory, which is a theory. It's not actually new. It's been around for a long time, that, you know, Laci is, was taken by a bunch of burglars that were burglarizing a house across the street, and she accidentally ran into them. So that's his theory. You know, he's doing his latest conversation with TV and the 21st century here, Netflix or whoever it's going to be. He's out and about, giving interviews, face to face with Scott Peterson. So,
well, that's got to make Nancy Grace happy.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Nancy's awesome, but he's got a hard sell on that one personally. I mean, just let's use logic. I mean, if you're a pregnant woman and you're out walking your dog and you see a robbery going down, i.e. a burglary, I mean, how many pregnant women go over and say, "Hey, what are you guys doing?"
9 months pregnant.
Yeah. I mean, and interfere with these. Well, first of all, how does she know there's a burglary going on? Is there a point of entry? Does she see how they got into the house? Can she see through the house and see them in the house? I mean, it's just, remember Rick Moranis in
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
Ludicrous speed.
Space.
Oh, Spaceballs, yeah.
Speed. I know.
Suck.
Yeah, Spaceballs. Ludicrous speed. Remember where his helmet gets all dinged up after they slam on the brakes?
Yeah.
And then he pulls this thing up. Smoke him if you got him.
Yeah.
Smoke if you got him.
And it's like, this is ludicrous speed. I mean, a pregnant woman, seeing a burglary go down, or, she interrupts a burglary across the street. That's the theory. That's the new theory and the new theme.
And that was something that was brought up by a lot of the Scott Peterson apologists, a while ago. None of it ever really got any traction, but yeah, he's riding with it now because the LA Innocence Project has now picked up his case, and which is different than the actual Innocence Project. But, now there's a new Netflix special out about the whole thing. And if there's ever a case that shows you how damning circumstantial evidence is, I think that this is one of those cases, because, I mean, let's just face the facts. Scott's out in a boat in the bay. 4 months later, his wife floats up in the bay where he was the day that she goes missing. You have these cinder blocks that were used to weigh her down, and if you go to it, they looked in his shop, and it looked like he was mixing, cement and all these different things, and he is calculated with the way that he talks. Less is more with him. He denied a polygraph at the very beginning. He was a suspect almost immediately due to his strange behavior. And like Dr. Gary says, I mean, it's pretty obvious. You don't have to be a weatherman to know which way the wind's blowing. But people, for some reason, the true crime community or true crime quote unquote aficionados, they want DNA, they want a photo, they want a video, they want a video of the crime, and or didn't happen.
Well, and they also want the Easter Bunny. Facts are facts. You don't investigate people. I mean, again, right? We go back to, common sense here. I mean, in some of his statements, right? I mean, he says, yeah, when I left, she was preparing to mop the floor, bake cookies, and take the dog for a walk.
9 months pregnant.
Now, I've been married for a very long time to one of the most beautiful women in the world.
Yeah.
Not only inside, but outside as well. And I've yet to know all three activities that my wife's going to do when I leave the house in the morning to go to work, yet alone go fishing. Okay?
On Christmas Eve.
My wife does not turn to me and say, hey, honey, just let you know, I'm going to, bake cookies. I'm going to mop the floor. And then I'm going to take the dog for a walk. Okay. Oh, okay. And then in the interim, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt a burglary across the street. Yeah, extra time.
I'm going to save the world. Dr. Gary, what's the kind of motive we looking at here? I mean, he's never confessed. He was convicted. He was put on death row. His death row sentence, thanks to California, was overturned. Shocker, shocker there. But switched to life, denied a new trial. Now the Innocence Project, LA Innocence Project is back at it with him. What would a motive be for something like this?
Well, I always thought that Scott Peterson, after being found guilty, was a very good example of the phenomenon that I named, elimination murder. That was a term I've coined, as listeners may know, because I've mentioned it in a few different places. And what that is essentially about is where a person is eliminated simply because the person is an impediment to something that the killer wants. In this particular case, I think what the killer wanted was to escape marriage and fatherhood, and was potentially, it had something to do with impediments to other romance, other potential relationship. But the fact is that this is a pretty clear example of getting rid of somebody and then using the classic cover story that all these elimination murderers tend to use, which is almost always something like a bunch of people or another person, that broke into the house, or, they walked in on the person brutally killed them, and, whatever. And these steps are taken to create this sham picture. But because these people are not career criminals, they're lousy at it. They do a very, very bad job of it. Now, I think it's important to emphasize, just to get the facts straight, that the reason we're doing this podcast on this case is that, there was this documentary that came out recently, Face to Face with Scott Peterson, on Peacock. And the claim to fame of this documentary is that it has the first interview, with Scott Peterson, an on-camera interview, the first one since 2003, which is just a year after the murders. And in it, of course, he says, I didn't kill my family and so forth. And that series came out just after a Netflix series called American Murder, Laci Peterson, which is really just the overall story of the case. And what I think is that I have the sense that the mother of Laci Peterson was a really extraordinary person, Sharon Rocca, I think, R-O-C-H. And, she's a remarkable person. And I think it's important to remember that, we're talking about a person who, a couple that had to bury their daughter, the skeletonized remains of their daughter, in a casket with the skeletonized remains of an infant, right, in the arms of the mother. That baby's name was supposed to be Connor or James. But we have to picture this whole thing. And she really hasn't talked. She hasn't come out and given interviews and so forth. And what I think is that this might have been, I don't know for sure, but I almost wondered if, in a way to try to preempt this, let's talk to Scott Peterson and give him a chance to say he's innocent kind of thing, you know, Laci's mother might not have said, let me preempt that by kind of talking and giving, you know, some different sides of this. Now, I don't know, but all I know is that I've been very impressed by her family. And, you know, we really have to think about what we're talking about here. We're talking about a woman who thought that she was in this kind of idyllic marriage, probably, right, with this guy that was by all standards, you know, nice looking, you know, guy and the whole thing. And she's 9 months pregnant and she's going to begin this beautiful life. And the next thing you know, she's dead. The baby is dead. And we all know, you know, the details of that murder and so forth. And the ridiculous story that he tells to try to cover it up. Now, I am not impressed by it. Obviously, if there's some evidence I'm unaware of, let's let that move through the courts. But I think, Chris, that from an investigative and psychological point of view, we can talk a little bit about how the cover story is rather ridiculous, as they always are, for a lot of reasons. Where do you even want to begin? I mean, don't you think, first of all, that the Elimination murder story matched a lot of the statistics on what tends to happen to women and their children who go missing, right, in terms of who tends to be the culprit? Hasn't that always been your experience, that the boyfriend or the husband is the very first person you talk to? When there's no rape, no crime, no murder. I mean, no rape, no robbery. I mean, it would be the first thing you would think, right?
Right. I mean, you put the victim risk continuum together, and you ask yourself, okay, you know, what's the environment, situation, circumstance, low, medium, high? Everything pointed that this was a low risk victimology here. And so then you start going, okay, well, who else is in the circle here and what's their background? And that's what they started to do from an investigative analysis aspect. Immediately they approached, you know, Scott with, so, you know, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you've been, what you've been doing. And, you know, he throws himself down on La Jolla and all this other stuff, okay, which is in the San Diego County area, which my neck of the woods. Okay. And then all of a sudden they find out, and around January 17th, they get a phone call from this young lady by the name of Amber Fry and says, hey, I noticed that my boyfriend, essentially, or at least the guy I've been dating and seeing, you know, since December 30th, you know, a couple days or a week after she went missing. Right. And all of a sudden, you know, she's reporting that he said he was single. You know, wait a minute, you have a wife at home who's pregnant with your child and she's missing, and you're out hooking up with other women and telling them, oh, by the way, you know, I'm single. And then it gets worse. He says, I'm a widower.
Yeah. He mentioned that she died.
Right. You know, and of course the cops immediately thought, well, that doesn't sound right. You know, because this is Amber Fry telling them that, look, I'm having some problems, you know, listening to this now that I know that he may have been married. And so I thought maybe I could call you up. And so she does. And immediately they want to put her on the phone in a controlled phone call and shoot a call into Scott to see if she can get him to cop out. So I think he was on the radar right from the get-go. And the fact that they find out about that one, and then, of course, they find out about a second one. And meanwhile, you know, he's telling the neighbors in the neighborhood, you know, help me, I've got to find my wife, when in reality, you know, he already knew. And I think, let's not forget, he's already been convicted. So he is a convicted murderer of two human beings, the fetus and his wife, Laci. And so, you know, in 2024 now, you know, he got life without possibility of parole. And by the way, here's an interesting thought. I knew some prisoners that had, thrown some shade on him up where he was locked up and had communicated. Now, there was nothing that had was, exculpatory and or evidentiary in nature. They just said he was scandalous. And this was after they got out, parolees that I had talked to. And they were like, yeah, I was up there with that Peterson guy. I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a real piece of work.
They didn't give us they never said anything that was, dramatic that would have changed anything, but they even thought he was sketchy.
Right. And the weird thing is, there's a lot of people that would give everything for the kind of life, that Scott Peterson had with the, the beautiful wife and the soon to be born child. I mean, we're talking Christmas Eve. And like I said, it was 2002. I have family down in the Central Valley in Modesto. We were down there, and up on this, it's Christmas. I believe it was Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. I can't remember. It was the evening, and that's when a missing report, came on TV. It was the local news, and I believe the Sacramento Bee was reporting it as well, and they put Laci's photo on the TV, and my aunt, who ran a restaurant in Modesto, it was called the Old Mill Cafe. She dropped her wine glass because they were patrons of hers, and she knew Laci and Scott, and
wow,
she was absolutely distraught. And when I remember kind of taking note, because it was quite the reaction, but I was like, oh, wow. So we left back home. And as we were leaving, there were just news trucks on the way in. I mean, they had the big old vans with the satellites, and it was quite the spectacle. But I remember my aunt's reaction. I couldn't believe, and then looking back at it, at the story that it became, one of the biggest murder stories ever. I mean, it was one of the first real, just, I wouldn't say made for TV because that's kind of insulting, but people were glued. People were absolutely glued to the TV about this. And because it had everything that a Hollywood movie would, and Dr. Gary, what do you think people's fascinations with that kind of stuff are? Because, I mean, the media blitz was unbelievable.
Well, it's interesting because in 1989, so just 13 years earlier, there was a very similar case. In fact, in the New Evil, Michael Stone and I linked the two cases, which was the Charles Stewart case in Boston. And what happened there was that a man killed his pregnant wife, who was 7 months pregnant, very beautiful. He killed her by shooting her. And then his cover story, it was the same exact thing. He was a kind of a psychopath who didn't want to be tied down in a marriage. He was involved with another woman, shot her. And the cover story there was that she was killed by African Americans, local African Americans. And it inflamed some local prejudice that was going on at the time and everything. And he wound up committing suicide. I think he jumped off a bridge, if I'm not mistaken. And I always wondered, why did that case never become as famous? What was the missing ingredient, right? They were exactly the same story, basically. I think the missing ingredient was that Scott Peterson's personality and his appearance made him television gold. I think the idea is that people who exude a kind of narcissistic, kind of attractive quality, you're fascinated by them. I think that sometimes what happens is when there's a certain type of figure involved, like we saw this with the Casey Anthony situation. There are certain people that they they have a made for television kind of quality that I think has something to do with exuding some aspect of a narcissistic personality structure where you admire them, you're attracted to them, you're fascinated by them. I can't help but think that, this is just a theory, but I wonder if in the Innocence Project he isn't schmoozing and charming people there into believing things about him, because I think he's a schmoozer. And I think that there is something about him even now that he has a boyish, kind of charm to him and all that. And, we see this in some cases where that, when that is the personality structure of an offender, that the public goes right along with it. They have admirers, they get love letters. Actually, it's interesting because you see a lot of that with Koberger. That with that kind of thing where his own controlling, potentially narcissistic quality leads to a portion of the country, being fascinated by him, glued to the TV. The truth of the matter is that there are mass murders like the one that he's accused of happening fairly often. Why that one? Why are we interested in Scott Peterson and didn't care about, the case that was just like it 13 years before, right? So that's the ingredient, I think, is you need that narcissistic figure that wants it to be famous, that wants it all over the television, who is a projection of our idea of what the nice looking, hard working, seemingly perfect boyfriend or husband would be like, who turns out to be the devil in disguise, that kind of thing. I also think that typical of that kind of person, when they make stupid mistakes, we forget it. Like Koberger leaving the sheath, that people can't accept that it was just a stupid boneheaded thing that might have been done. So they make up these conspiracy theories to explain it, like it was an act of genius. He left it on purpose to mess with us all, that kind of thing. Well, they did that with Peterson too. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Peterson, if he's guilty, and I think he certainly, I think, was guilty of killing his wife.
Found guilty too.
I was very compelled by the evidence myself. Of course, let's see. But I think it was a classic example of like where you think you're doing something brilliant and you're a master liar, but it's sort of dumb and boneheaded. Like, who doesn't think that bodies are going to wash up? Like, you think you're eliminating the body of your pregnant wife, but then, like, don't you know it's going to wash up on shore? Well, the other example is these killers who think they're brilliant when they throw a body in the water, but they forget that, like, decomposing food is going to create gas that's going to, like, make the body float. Right, Chris?
Right.
You know what I'm talking about? Decomposition. Yeah. You get like air is going to like, and gas is going to like push the body up to the top of the water. It's like they think that they have these brilliant ideas, but they're not very smart. And like just as an example of the kind of liar that Peterson was, and when he was talking to Amber Fry, I mean, she heard water in the background, right? One time, like I think he was out by the water where the Laci and the child are killed, right? And he told her that he was in Paris on a business trip, and she was hearing the river in the background. He was outside, I guess by the Seine or something. And that's what she was hearing. I mean, that's the kind of liar you're dealing with. Now, all of us have known a person who lies like that, who tells ridiculous stories that nobody would believe in a million years unless they were completely enchanted by somebody and wanted to believe their lies. Have you ever known a liar like that? Who tell charmer stories? They're so ridiculous. I don't know how anybody could believe
Are
them.
you asking me or are you asking John?
He's asking you.
I'm asking both of you. But it's like the story my family always tells of someone that my mother knew who always used to make up stories. And she had one time she had a white streak of hair, like gray hair. And my mother said to her, "What's that white streak of hair you had?" She said, "Oh, I was in the Olympics, and this is from the chlorine swimming in the pool made me get this white," like that kind of lie. And I think that's what you saw with Peterson. It was like you don't even have enough empathy to feel that someone could tell your story is stupid. And that's a little of what we're seeing now with this aim at, getting his case tossed out. Do you find the story ridiculous, Chris?
Yeah, it does. It reminds me of, so I had a case. It was Scott Tower was the victim. It was about 1991.
Right.
And the suspect was a guy named Mark Gessie. And anyway, it was a water caper. And Scott Scott had gone to go fishing, and he was supposed to get have surgery on his shoulder. And he goes down to the Oceanside Harbor, and he's standing on one of the piers there, and this boat pulls up from across the way after just getting fuel. And he pulls up and he goes, hey, to Scott, who's standing on the pier casting, and he goes, hey, you want to go get some, we're out where the big ones are? And Scott's like, yeah, sure. He says, okay, hop in, get in the boat. Anyway, he gets in the boat, and, only one of them returns, and that's Mark. And his family, Scott's family, gets, all freaked out that he hasn't shown up for his surgery, and calls the PD, and we find his car had been ticketed, parked there down where the pier was, where he got on the boat. Anyway, we put it all one and one together, and ultimately I end up arresting this guy, Gessie. We arrested him actually in Florida and extradited him back. My partner and I had to go back there and pick him up, and we flew him back. But essentially what happened is he got out there and, tried to make a move on him. And they got into a fight, and he hit him with a fish hook, one of the giant gaffs, the fish gaff. And his body went overboard, and he sunk, like you're talking, because that's what happens. Your body, the gases don't expand yet. It takes about 10 days, and then the body will pop up like a buoy.
Yeah.
Anyway, a jet skier hit the body, and so we recovered the body, found him, and this is a classic situation. And I mean, Peterson, somehow let's go back with his theory. Let's run with his theory. Laci comes home, or at least she's walking back with the dog, and Scott says, I guess on the show, I haven't seen it, but I'm just reading something about it, where, she interrupted a burglary across the street. Okay. Well, first of all, what people forget is once you kill somebody, you now have a bag of concrete that you have to deal with. Okay. So we have to presuppose now that Laci somehow interrupts this burglar. And in California, that's PC 459. That's the penal code section for it. Okay. Somehow Laci interrupts this burglary going down. They're like, oh, this pregnant woman just interrupted us, so she's going to be able to identify us. So let's go ahead and kill her. So they, according to his theory, they kill her. And now they're like, oh, well, we've killed her. So now we've got this body. And is it one burglar, two burglars, three burglars, four burglars? How many burglars? We don't know. I don't think he's offered that yet. But let's just run with two. Just put one on the feet, two at the feet, two at the upper body. And now they got this dead woman, pregnant woman, and they go, you know what, let's put her in a vehicle somewhere, or let's get her to the harbor. Let's get her to the marina. And, two smart burglars go, well, that's a good idea. I agree with that. Or, let's get her to the marina. Okay. Well, how are we going to do that? I don't know. Let's put her in whatever the vehicle or however it is. All right. And not only that, I have another idea on the burglar. And imagine these two guys thinking it out, going, well, what do you got? What are you thinking? Let's weigh her body down and sink it to the bottom of the marina. You know what? You're a genius, Frank. This is like Dumb and Dumber. Okay. Hey, that's a good idea. And all of a sudden, it just happens to be the exact, as you said, Josh, the exact area where, Scott happened to be fishing. And, that just happens to be the area where later on, 4 months later in April, her body appears on the shoreline.
Yeah, but it wasn't like it was around the corner either. It was like 45 minutes away.
Well, of course, that's what the burglars needed to do, right? They needed to go 45 minutes
Right.
to drop her in the exact fishing hole
Right.
where Scott was going to be.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I mean, who was it, on Saturday Night Live? Yeah, that's the ticket.
Yeah, that's it, ticket.
John Lovitz.
John Lovitz. All of a sudden, boom, there she is. She's discovered. But the sad part is, that poor baby was also
I know.
found with
Yeah.
her. So go ahead, Gary. What kind of person can do that, Gary? What kind of personality pulls that off?
It's interesting because it's in one of the things that Michael Stone and I talk about in The New Evil is that this is not a new evil. This kind of escaping of marriage or, getting into one or leaving one, or escaping fatherhood is a very old reason for murder. For example, there was the famous case of Chester Gillette, which, was one of the most famous cases of the early 20th century. It was the basis for the play An American Tragedy and the movie A Place in the Sun. I'm sure you remember that movie, A Place in the Sun, with Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor and Shelley Winters. And, that was a case of a social climbing, again, kind of nice looking guy, very callous. And a woman named Grace Brown had told him, look, you've gotten me pregnant and I'd like to have a future with you. And he takes her out on a canoe ride. And when she turns her head, he beats her with a tennis racket, pregnant, beats her with a tennis racket and throws her in the water and she drowns. And he almost got away with it. He claimed it was an accident, whole phony cover story, like always. And then when they did an autopsy, they determined that, well, before she drowned, she was suffering cerebral hemorrhage from being bludgeoned with something. And it turned out that, he was guilty and they electrocuted him. He was executed for that case. And, it's a classic example of an old reason for murder, where you're simply eliminating a person that's in the way. And so I think that, again, it's shocking the degree to which that case got that much attention, right? Now, because it's an old kind of story. There are two kinds of elimination murderers, right? There are the unsophisticated, more impulsive kind who aren't really psychopaths. They're not really people that you would expect to go on and do other callous things or have a history of doing callous things or be particularly personality disordered. They just sort of do it stupidly and impulsively. And then there are the kind of people who methodically plot the elimination of a murder. Some of those cases, those elimination murders can be very sophisticated and some can be very silly. For example, Lizzie Borden, if she was guilty, spoiler alert, she was. Lizzie Borden, of course, was an elimination murderer who was trying to get rid of a father and a stepmother who were impediments to financial satisfaction and being able to have a life, because there was no way in that family that she was going to be able to have a debutante ball or anything necessary to find herself a husband, which was the only way to get out of your home in those days. She was sort of stuck, and her father was worth the equivalent of $10 million in American money. And he had to go. And the stepmother that was going to take the money after he died had to go. So there was elimination murder, and she pretended that somebody broke in and did it, right? Classic. So there's that type. And then there's the type that is a lot more callous that does it in a way that is unnecessarily over the top cruel, right? So a really good example of that kind of elimination murder is Jennifer Cooley, who was a woman that had she had a boyfriend who was like paraplegic, and she didn't want to take care of him anymore. Only like his head moved, kind of a thing. And so she gets a big panel van and wheels him in the wheelchair onto the panel van, presses on the gas, rams it through the gate of a forested area, opens the door, dumps him out, and leaves him there to die in the cold, completely aware, with just his head consciously moving, whatever, his body paralyzed, to be frozen, eaten by animals, the whole thing. Now, why was that kind of elimination necessary? Why couldn't she just pull the feeding tube out or something, right? So that sometimes there's like an extra horror that is not necessary. And I think that's the part that adds that kind of element of more evil to elimination murderer. In this case, it's something interesting to think about. I mean, what was the means of death? Do we know?
No.
Right.
No, I don't think they could determine because of the decomposition of the body.
Right. So it could have been a very rapid thing, but I do think it was premeditated because he was talking to Amber Fry before, about her already in the past tense, that she was clearly an impediment and she had, had to go in his mind, that kind of thing. And so there would have been some premeditated kind of quality. And based on this guy's personality and the way that, he acted as if he adored her and the whole thing, I really don't think she would have seen it coming. My guess is that they were just having a nice day or something, and he was pretending to be a doting husband, and then boom, turned on her, out of nowhere, and did what he did. I mean, that's the way you have to picture it, because unless there was a secret that those two were not getting along, so that I think it would have been very, very calculating, and I think in the sense of lying to her, the way that he would have been cruel. But I don't know if the mechanism of death would have been strung out, drawn out or protracted or anything like that. We don't know. But the other question is, how did he get them to the water? Like, how callous was he? How was the whole thing? Did he even think about the idea that she was pregnant with this child? The whole thing. And so I think the type of person who does it is a kind of emotionally immature person, a callous person who wants what they want and selfishly thinks, if you're in the way, then eliminating you is simply like jumping your pawn in a game of chess. No hard feelings, but you've got to be eliminated.
Another thing is too, he's always maintained his innocence, and he's still doing that.
They always do.
They always do. Right. But let's not forget the fact that he beat his own head with a bottle of bleach while he was driving to Mexico with, thousands of dollars of cash, his brother's ID, all kinds of stuff. He said, "Oh, I'm just going golfing." And then all of a sudden, he's arrested and he's got like orange hair, like, he looks absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the guy was on the run. He was running.
Nothing to see here.
Right.
Move along.
Right.
Nothing to see here.
Innocent.
Popsicle
That's
man.
what innocent people do, right? They take off to Mexico. Well, he was going to a San Diego golf course.
Yeah, he was going to La Jolla
with a nice new hairdo. And
because he grew up in San Diego, by the way. Remember?
Yeah, well, he was about to live the rest of his life in Mexico.
Yeah, he was. That was the theory that he was taking off, no doubt. Go ahead, Gary.
But don't you see what you're saying? Is that this is a guy where he was obsessed with his freedom.
Yes.
That's exactly the point, and that is exactly the symbolism of him still trying to get out all these years later. The whole point is that for this kind of guy, being in a marriage and having a baby would have been like being in a jail cell. He's got to get out. He's not going to stop. He's going to do whatever he's got to do to schmooze his way out of there or talk his way out of there. And I think that all you're seeing is a replication of that same process of I got to get out of here. I can't be in here. I can't handle this responsibility. So the same kind of person who couldn't accept the responsibility of fatherhood and marriage, the type of person who can't accept the responsibility of saying, okay, I'm guilty. I have to pay the price. Right. So you would never expect that kind of person to admit guilt.
So I have a question. If he gets out, will he kill again?
It's impossible to say because elimination murderers are all over the map in terms of that. But let's just say that under the right circumstances, they can have the propensity. For example, I believe that, oh God, why is the name going out of my head? The South Carolina case, famous case.
Oh, Susan Smith.
No, not Susan Smith. That
Murdoch.
was another murder.
Yeah, Murdoch.
Oh, Alex.
Was that South Carolina too?
Alex, yeah.
Anymore.
Alex.
Yeah, he's
I think he's going to get a new trial too, by the way.
I think that's another example of what probably was. I think that was another example of an elimination murder situation. And I think what you're dealing with there is the idea that may be somebody who repetitively had people that had to be, shall we say, wiped off the face of the earth because of something that would have gotten in the way of either reputation or money or something like that. And there you also had the ridiculous cover story, with the phone call, reporting the something that was completely fabricated, right? So and notice again, you have the individual who is constantly on television, the individual who is fighting for freedom, the individual who has the phony cover story. The ingredients are usually the same in these kinds of people because there's a very particular kind of personality who says, I am entitled to get rid of these people because they're in the way, right? Now, who tends to think like that? Members of gangs, mafiosi think like that. It's that whole thing of like, it's not personal, it's just business. You're in the way, you got to go. But in those cases, it's not a personal cause thing, right? So like if you're, Chris, in a gang murder, for example, if the head of the gang orders a hit, you could go and commit the most passionate, vile murder at a person who means absolutely nothing to you.
Yeah. I've had them. I had a guy, they put him on the steps of his mother's house, had him kneel down. They shot him in the back of the head.
Golly.
Yep.
So an ability to feel that someone's mother is going to see that and be horrified by it, right? But no compassion for the individual.
None. Zero.
Right. All right. So it's like, that's the interesting thing about that. And that somebody who is schmoozing Laci, making her believe that she's loved and the whole thing, you have to have a capacity for empathy where you can feel the feelings of another person to know how to fake that you care about them. But you have to lack compassion for them because they're annoyingly in the way, And incidentally, what wound up happening to Amber Fry? Does anybody know?
She wrote a book.
Yeah, but what now? Where is she now?
I don't know.
Did they interview her for either of these shows?
I haven't watched it yet, to be honest with you. I plan on watching them here in the next day or two, but yeah, I don't know. I find her to be a bit of a sympathetic figure. I mean, obviously she got thrust into something and made a phone call, and then she worked with law enforcement and it seemed like she was doing the right things, and nobody asked to be brought into that type of situation. But I've seen several interviews with her and
right.
But no, I don't know. I don't.
Married a cop at one point.
I think she's married.
She was briefly married to a cop, I know, and I think she worked as a masseuse at one point. And but the thing is, I think it would be interesting to find out if she went on to have a very different spidey sense about men, after him, because I think obviously there were real problems with his stories and all that. But I wonder, if you're finding yourself really attracted to a person while you're also feeling uncomfortable about them. I mean, what happens then in your later relationships? I think about that, because and think about what all the people who knew Scott Peterson thought when this was all over. I mean, because by all reports, he was like the greatest catch, that kind of thing, right? They thought he was fantastic.
Yeah.
But so that, and some people have called him a psychopath, right? But he doesn't have that picture, at least to my knowledge, of like the classic juvenile delinquent, like kind of psychopathic life. It's more like what some people call a sociopath, like a, that kind of like psychopath light, where you're kind of high functioning, or you could be like a climber in a business, or like very cutthroat. Yeah, like that. Some people call sociopath psychopath light. And people like that could be politicians. They can be, really cutthroat businessmen. They can be, you know what I mean. But under pressure, yeah, you see how they'll ruthlessly eliminate anybody who dares to stand in the way or doesn't venerate them, and the way they demand public adoration and all that. I mean, it's a very classic type. And it's an interesting story, and I'm going to watch the documentaries. I haven't heard anything about them, but I don't know. I wish they would put a greater emphasis on Laci.
Yeah, I do too.
More emphasis on her. Yeah.
And to answer your question, because I was curious myself, it says that Fry has continued to live in Fresno, California, with her daughter and son, and she did actually. She is in this documentary where she goes on to give more detail about her relationship with Scott, and she continues to believe in his absolute guilt. And good for her. I mean, honestly, I have a lot of respect for people that get on the stand and do the right thing, and that's what she was put in a really bad spot. She really was. I mean, and I know that there are people that say harsh things about her and whatever. I mean, who doesn't say who's not critical of everybody in the world, but ultimately she did the right thing.
Right.
I think there's a sexual undertone here too.
Absolutely.
With him. I mean, he orders 2 pornography channels to his, his lineup when she dies after her death, and puts it under his mother's name when he orders them under his mother's name, and uses, her information to get these 2 channels added to their TV service. So yeah, a lot of deception going on with him for sure. And it's going to be interesting to see how this thing, unfolds, but hopefully, he's locked up for a long time,
Well, Chris, in your experience, haven't you encountered a lot of boyfriends and husbands that eliminated their wives?
Have I had a lot of husbands eliminate their wives?
Yeah, or boyfriends? Isn't that a rather common?
I've had a few. Yeah, I mean, I've had, some. Yeah, not a whole bunch, but I've had some.
And when it happens, wouldn't you say that the less sophisticated killers don't even bother to pretend that there was an attempted sexual assault or an attempt at robbery or whatever? The more common reasons why some random stranger would come in and kill the, whatever, they don't even bother. Like, for example, I mentioned the Lizzie Borden case. In that rather unsophisticated attempt at creating a cover story, she didn't even bother to take jewelry off her father that was worth a lot of money. He had about $80 in his pocket at the time. No attempt at robbery. There was no attempt to even make it appear there was any attempt, a sexual attempt on the stepmother. Nothing of the sort, right? It was just like somebody broke in and killed them. Why? Right? Somebody dad. I mean, why kill the stepmother? What's the, and then of course there's a motive that makes it seem very clear what. So I guess that's the whole thing. The unsophisticated ones don't even have a clever cover story. This guy tried a cover story, but it was like dumb. It's a dopey cover story. And, as I said, even with the Koberger alibi, there are some stories that they really insult the intelligence. You know what I mean? They're really insulting to the intelligence. And I think the story that this guy has, more power to him if he wants to go through the Innocent Project and all that, but I'm not impressed. Are you?
No. He was convicted for the obvious reasons. I mean, it was a circumstantial case for sure, but you have to line up every single star almost instantaneously and say, okay, yeah, there's a galaxy there. And unfortunately, all the stars lined up circumstantially for him.
I love circumstantial cases.
Yeah, exactly.
I love them because it's just like a roadmap, and like what? In all honesty, this is a question to both of you. What are the chances that he goes fishing in the same spot that his wife floats up 4 months later?
Well, one of the guys that they interviewed and they put on the stand, he was, an oceanographer kind of guy. And that was the great thing working in San Diego County, because we had Scripps right there, Scripps Oceanography. And we used to, whenever somebody went off, the pier or anything like that, if it's a suicide or if it's somebody tosses a body over and they drown and they're not, et cetera. Well, when they sink, so one of the things we used to do is, and I went down to Scripps many times and talked to those professors and those scientists down there in relationship to tell us about the tides, because they have buoys off the Pacific, all the way up and down the Pacific, and they monitor where those tides are going and how they're, so you take the mass, the density, and the volume of a human body, and then, you anticipate mathematically in 10 days, this thing is going to expand. And that expansion is going to take the body, in certain places with the current tide systems that's going on. And we used to predict, they would predict, where the potential victim could show up. And if there was dredging going on in the harbor, or if there's dredging going on off the beach, where they're pumping sand up onto the beaches, that changes the currents. And here in this situation, you have a controlled marina, Berkeley Marina, right? And the tides that are, moving in there are so, it's murky water, it's dirty, it's all the things that these divers report when they come up and they say, hey, I can't even see my hand in front of my face. And, you stand there and say, okay, well, go down one more time, and see if you can find something. Well, the defense argued, well, if he made these 4 anchors, because remember, he was allegedly made 5 anchors, okay? And 4 of them were attached to her body. So you assume that one was attached to each of the limbs, okay? And that, he throws her overboard and she sinks. Okay? First of all, that's one sick puppy. That's one evil dude.
Oh, yeah.
That's taking his pregnant wife and, tying her up. And then they find duct tape on the child. Okay. That, now you say, okay, golly, did he just duct tape her? Did he duct tape the child? What's going on here? And then you think about, the fact that this victim was thrown over into the marina and she surfaces, 4 months later after the animals, the fish, the fish go for the soft tissue immediately.
Right.
If you're underwater. But what if she was alive? I don't know. The autopsy's been sealed. And I haven't seen a copy of it, but if she had water in her lungs, man, that means she was alive. Okay? And she was breathing potentially. I don't know. We'd have, if somebody knows, they can tell us. But I mean, just think about the mentality it takes to do that. Do you honestly believe that a burglar who's just trying to break into houses 90% of the time for narcotics to keep their habits going, because they're going to go take the stuff that they got and they're going to go sell it and they're going to go buy dope. Okay? That they decide, you know what, today I'm just going to graduate up to a homicidal maniac where I'm going to tie this lady up with 4 anchors and throw her into the harbor or into the marina. I don't know. I'm not buying.
Chris, about him, that like he hadn't had a fishing license since 1994. It's now 2002. And a few weeks before she disappears, he starts researching fishing boats, right? And then he purchases a small fishing boat December 9th, right? and then he gets a fishing license, which is valid for only 2 days before she disappears. Right.
Yes.
So it's like, it's all very, again, like it's that thing of, don't you think someone is going to patch that together? That's a little bit fishy. So, well, I mean, I don't mean that. Yeah, no, that was an accidental, but I wouldn't joke about this horrendous case. But I really do think, Chris, like this is all that arrogance that I'm talking about, right? It's that whole thing of like, I'm so entitled to freedom that this is going to be easy.
And to push it off, on some burglar across the street, and that my wife ran into this burglar, and then this burglar immediately becomes a homicidal maniac.
And they don't kill the dog.
And they don't kill the dog. They let the
dog with the leash on it winds up back in the yard, but no leash.
Once again, the dogs.
Best witnesses in homicide cases ever.
Right. But why wouldn't they kill the dog?
Because they only had 4 anchors, Gary.
I mean, the dog would have been going ballistic.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's ridiculous. The whole
Maybe
thing.
he's a cat burglar.
Yeah, but I also think there's a little bit. One of the interesting things about these elimination murders is a lot of the stories, the cover stories.
That was good.
They have in them a whiff of victim blaming. Because there's also like, if my wife had minded her own business and not gone over to inspect this burglary, she wouldn't be dead. That kind of thing.
Yeah, but
I mean, basically saying that like she went over there to investigate, and that's what led to her death.
One of the and one of the crazies. Well, I don't think it's crazy, but being a burglar and being a murderer are quite a far jump from one to the other. I mean, it's asinine for him to even think. I mean, if this is the best that he's got, he just might as well sit in jail the rest of his life. I mean, he already lucked out by not getting the death penalty, because he was sentenced to death, which was overturned.
But they never execute anybody there. You stay there 100 years, nothing's going to happen. I know.
I know.
Phenomenal kind of a thing.
I know, but it's also, but still, he's on death row. That, I mean, it's a bit symbolic at times, I guess. But I mean, that's what he does. I mean, in my personal opinion, that's what he deserved was, and that's what they gave him. That's what he was sentenced to. Nobody ever thought that he was actually going to be executed. I mean, like you said, it never happened. Right. And that's a total different subject for a different day. But he's a schmoozer. But he also didn't think through that anyone was going to question him about this. Like, for example, when they said to him, "What kind of fish did you go out to catch?" He couldn't name any. Right.
I mean,
he said sturgeon. He went to fish for sturgeon, no, that's where he was going to catch. But
that's what he said. My understanding is that he said that they asked him. Hold on, I'm going to look at my notes here.
Yeah, he said he went there. It was like 90 miles away from his house to go fish for sturgeon.
Okay, because I have in my notes that
he didn't even know what a sturgeon is. How long had it been since he had a fishing license?
I don't know. It's in 1994. But I read, I have in my notes, because I keep records, that they asked him what kind of fish he had been out fishing for, and it said this guy, Detective John Evers, testified in court that Scott couldn't say. He couldn't say what. So I never heard the sturgeon story, but it wouldn't shock me if he contradicted himself somewhere. But I guess what I'm saying is you have to picture a person who, for some time, is talking to another woman, maybe even other women, right? And he's got the idea and scheming in his mind. I'm going to get rid of this one, right? She's more and more pregnant by the minute, getting closer to the delivery date. And he's thinking, it's now or never. I've got to get out of this, whatever. And then he imagines what he's going to do. And he's got to be with the wife laying in bed with them, the whole thing. He's got to be rubbing her belly, kissing the belly. I can't wait till the baby comes. Oh, honey, what a beautiful future we're going to have. Oh, this, that, and the other thing. I mean, you'd have to make the person believe that you were madly in love with them the whole time. I mean, just think about the callousness that would be necessary, wouldn't you say, Chris? I mean, it's awful.
Yeah, the verbiage of "I'm here to help you."
Right, exactly, like that we hear in the
Cobra,
the
right?
Cobra.
I'm here to help you.
That phony baloney, kind of lovey-dovey thing must have been going on, at least the way I envision it. And then he, does what he does and doesn't even think through in all of that time, in all the weeks or whatever of plot, doesn't even plan out, wow, I might actually get caught and might have to actually come up with a decent story here. I mean, you would think an intelligent person would have plotted out the answer to everything, so, and caught his own contradictions and all that. So I just think whatever was going on in this guy's psyche, there was something impulsive, there was something entitled, there was something where he never really thought anyone was going to question him. He was obsessed with his freedom. And my guess is that he was a guy a lot of women were attracted to, and he had the impulse control of a squirrel. I mean, he would see something and go, wow, and then like that. And he would just make it up as he went along to get whatever he wanted. I think there probably are other women out there who one day will come forward and say, yeah, he approached me.
I always thought that too.
On me. Yeah, I mean, right. But do you get Michael Stone's point about that? There's this weird quirk where like you're supposed to be looking for a long-term partner, but for some evolutionary reason that makes no sense, these kind of guys are attractive. And I think it has something to do with the idea that they're so callous and so cold, that you could be attracted to the idea that if they're that cold and callous, maybe they'll protect you. They'll be cold and callous towards someone who's your enemy, But this is the worst kind. This is the kind of guy that like you mistake for being loving. Like she really thought that Laci thought this guy was like loving. She didn't know he was, potentially a sociopath or something, right? But I'm saying, there are women out there and men that are attracted to sociopathic people.
Look at that picture of him.
They think they're protective. Yeah, right. Well, he also had that chameleon quality.
He looks like Jacques Cousteau.
He looks like Jacques Cousteau, but I can see he does look like.
Okay, he looks like an extra in the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Well, it's got that cheesy beard, and I think
who does that? Your wife
looks like Van Gogh to me.
Huh?
It looks like Van Gogh.
If only he would have cut his ear off, huh?
Well,
guys, I think that we've covered this, and we're going to see where it goes, and we'll keep an eye on it. I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed kicking this around with you guys. It's fascinating, and it'll be interesting when we check out the new series on Netflix to see. I fully believe in his guilt. I think they got it right. I've seen nothing to indicate that anybody was ever involved. But that's our justice system, and the LA Innocence Project is having a good time. I don't know what they're doing, but we'll see.
He's entitled to, if he's entitled to have evidence heard if it exists. There are people who go to jail and happen to be innocent, but
in the words of Tony Soprano, you're entitled to.
Well, I'll say that I think it would be instructive for people who are interested in these.
He already got shot down for a new trial.
All right.
Good Lord! I mean, what do they want? I mean, test the DNA test, fine. I don't care about that, but I mean, golly. I mean, to what end are we doing this here? You know what I mean?
Well, I'll say that if anyone in the audience is interested in the idea of elimination murder and in these men who kill girlfriends or wives who, to escape relationships or being a father, I would say take a look at categories 10 and 11 in the New Evil, my book with Michael Stone. And I also think take a look at the cases of Charles Stewart and the case of Chester Gillette, who are men who were escaping fatherhood.
Are they in your book?
Oh, they are indeed both in there. Yes.
So I have an idea. If you want to read about those guys, buy Gary's book, The New Evil, on Amazon.
Do it.
And you'll not only read about them, but dozens more that will entertain you for weeks. And it's a great book.
More alive.
Shameless plug by McDonough for Dr. Bricado.
Chris.
Well, I appreciate that.
Of course.
What time you got to be up in the morning?
Say what, John?
What time are you up in the morning?
Early.
Are you a 4 a.m.er?
No, I get up about 5:30.
All right.
Got to go fishing?
Yeah.
Too early. I get up
He's going to go
early.
fishing
I
for sturgeon.
The candle at both ends sometimes.
I don't think there are sturgeon in the Pacific Ocean, right?
Well, I'm surprised he didn't say he was fishing for marlin.
I tell you what, I've ever only gone out on a fishing boat one time in my life. You guys know that story. And it was a sergeant. And Mike, if you're listening, I'm going to throw you under the boat. His name was Goldfish. His name is Goldsmith, but we call him Goldfish. And he tells me one day, "Hey, you want to go fishing?" I said, "Well, you know what? I've never been deep sea fishing." So he says, "No problem. Meet me down at the harbor at dark 30 before the sun comes up." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." So myself, a whole bunch of other guys, we all show up, and he says he's got this boat. I think it was like a 33-foot Boston whaler or something like that. And anyway, we all load up, and I'm like, "Yeah, this is kind of cool." And so we're headed out, and next thing you know it, we're leaving the harbor, and this doggone boat is airborne. And I'm like, boom, it comes down. And I'm like, "Mike," and he goes, "Yeah, hang on, up, boom, right out of the doggone movies. This thing's going up waves. And we get up there, the sun's coming up, and I see water on both sides of the boat. And we're in a trough. And I'm going, "Mike, I've never gone deep sea fishing, but this doesn't look right." Okay. In fact, doesn't look right at all. And I said, "Did you turn the weather on?" He goes, "Well, just a minute." Click, turns the radio on for the first time, I think, ever. Because you got to know Mike. He's an amazing human being. But anyway, small craft advisory, turn around, all boats should be in. And I'm thinking, oh, we're going to die. we're going to die. We're going to get, how are we going to turn this sucker around? Because the waves are so big, And anyway, he says, "Oh, hang on." I'm like, "Turn this boat around now." Get us in. And he did it. He made it. And we go back in, and I've never been on another boat in the ocean outside of a police boat where we used to go shoot the sea lions off of the buoys with the fire hose for training.
Hey, well, that's not true, Gary. One time we were doing a show, and I pasted Chris's face onto Jack Dawson's from Titanic while he was holding Rose.
Oh no!
Oh yeah,
yeah, I did.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Yeah.
Our harbor guys, our harbor police would take us out for rides if you wanted to go out, and they would practice with their fire hoses and stuff, and hit the sea lions off of the buoys off the Pacific, and it was great to watch. And they were funny because they'd sit there and try to bite the water coming at them, and then they'd jump in.
They're mean.
And then they'd jump back up.
They're mean.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, they shoot them off the buoys, but they didn't hurt them. Of course, those things
they're so mean.
Yeah, they didn't hurt them. It was just great
Very
fun.
cute.
Well, I'll say that I think I always thought, and just as a final comment, I always thought there was something so sad about 15 or so murders I have in my records of people who take someone out on a boat and kill them, and then dump because obviously the idea is the convenience that you could get rid of the body in the belly of the ocean kind of a thing. But to get them on the boat, you have to picture because now we don't know if she was killed on the boat, but if she was, you have to picture the intimacy of being in this little thing, right, with this person, and taking them out in the water, and just kind of go, "Oh, isn't it a beautiful day? Oh, look at that, honey," that kind of thing. It reminds me of when they kill Fredo in the Godfather Part 2. Remember, they take him out on the boat, and he's thinking he's having a nice fishing day, whatever. The next thing you know, blam.
Yeah.
It's and then you just,
It's like what they did to Big Puss in The Sopranos.
Yeah. But you sucker the person into thinking they're in this intimate little place with you, and then you kill them.
Well, let's end it on the victims here, Laci and young unborn Connor are the forgotten ones. You have these documentaries and things that come out, and these people give these interviews, and they're the fallen ones that really need to be remembered. And it's a terrible thing what happened to these two, and I believe justice was served, and I hope it continues to be that way.
Justice is maintained.
What's that?
And maintained.
Hopefully it's maintained.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Anything going out? Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you for listening to the Witness Box. We appreciate it so much, and we'll catch you on the next show. Take care.